thank you for allowing me to interview you this time.
Sure.
It's fun.
I'm an open book.
You're 50 years in 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that strange to think about?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, it's just strange. Time goes fast. Time is fleeting. Not only is it strange to be turning 50, but it's just strange that it's 2017. I remember when I was young and seeing the movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey and thinking, oh my God, that's like, just so futuristic. Oh my God, will we even be alive? And now here we are. It's already 16 years past that. It's So time is a strange thing. But yeah, my kids are now growing up, and it's just time. Time gets faster as we get older.
And you're celebrating your 50 years by doing a special tour as well with Shattered Fortress.
Well, it was never supposed to be a tour, to be honest. I mean, it was only ever going to be just a set at my 50th birthday bash on Cruise to the Edge. And, as you know, now that it's already happened, that show was supposed to be something that celebrates my whole career. So we had Transatlantic and Flying Colors and did some Liquid Tension music. And of course I had to play Dream Theater music, so it seemed like it was the perfect time and place to finally do the 12-step suite. And honestly, it was never my intention to do anything more than just that.
Right.
And then once the word got out, then suddenly Night of the Prague and Lorelei invited me, and then B Prague, my friend in Barcelona, invited me. And I was like, all right, well, maybe not everybody can go to the cruise. It's very expensive. And so, being I'm already up and running and rehearsed, why not? But only now. This is it. So I figured it's, my 50th birthday year, and I'll do this in some select markets, and it will be special for the fans and good for me to get it out of my system. But that's it, just one time only.
How did you choose the people to go with you on that tour?
Well, I guess it dates back a few years. Hagen was doing a U.S. tour, and my son's band, Next to None, was opening for them. And at the final show of the tour, they asked if I would come up and play The Mirror with them. Hagen, I'm talking about. And so I went up and played The Mirror with them, and they just killed it. It was perfect. So in the back of my mind, I thought, well, if I ever was going to do the 12-step suite, this is the band. They're all incredible musicians individually, and even as a band, I think Hagen is this new generation's like prog metal super band. I think they are kind of like what I used to do at Dream Theater reminds me of, but a modern day version.
They're one of my favorite bands as well. So
yeah. So I knew in the back of my head I wanted to have them as my backing band if I was to ever do the 12-step suite. And then, but then I had the idea of also adding Eric Gillette, because Eric plays with me in the Neal Morse Band. And of all the guitar players I've played with through the years, he reminds me the most of John Petrucci. He's just got such a similar style. So I knew I wanted him to be a part of it as well. So, here we are now with 3 guitar players, because Hagen has 2 guitar players. I wasn't going to have one without the other. And then Eric as well. So it's now a big kind of Dream Theater orchestra.
So you're doing 12-step suite on this tour. You're doing other Dream Theater songs or other songs from your catalog as well?
Other Dream Theater songs that are my lyrics.
Right.
I stay only with that. But there's a lot, there's a lot of songs I wrote the lyrics to.
Yeah.
And whenever I wrote the lyrics, I wrote the vocal melodies, and I also did a lot of singing usually within those songs. So yeah, inevitably, it's all about the 12-step suite, but inevitably some of these shows we're going to have, a little extra time, maybe a 90-minute show or whatever, so there'll be some extra songs as well.
So how's the Neal Morse Band tour going now, this tour that you're on now?
It's been great. We're doing The Similitude of a Dream from start to finish, and as I've talked about in so many interviews, to me it's a very special album for me. It's, to me, one of my favorite albums of my entire career, and one of my favorite albums of Neal's entire catalog as well. So yeah, it's a very special album for us, and it's just, it seems to be really being received really well. It's like this music is so dramatic, but also so emotional. Like every night, I could see grown men crying in the audience.
That's cool.
And it's amazing that people are being moved as much as they are by this music and this story and the emotions of it.
So when Neal Morse did transition from just Neal Morse into Neal Morse Band, how did that change for you creatively? How did you do drums in Neal Morse versus Neal Morse Band? How do you do the music?
The drumming doesn't change, but it's the creative process that's very, very different. Process. For me, the drumming is just a very, very small bit of what I do. But the creative process changed immensely. All the previous Neal Morse albums, that I did from 2002 through 2014 or so, those were Neal's albums, his music. Randy and I would occasionally have a suggestion here or there, but for the most part, Randy and I were just the drums and the bass, and it was all Neal's music. But Neal put together this band. He did YouTube auditions back in 2014 or so, and that's where he found Bill Hubauer and Eric Gillette, as well as Adson, who was in the band at that time.
Yeah.
But we went off on the Momentum tour with this band, and it was just such an amazing band. Like, Bill plays every instrument, from violin to clarinet to mandolin to flute to, he's just an amazing all-around musician. And then Eric is this crazy talent, like I mentioned already. He just, really reminds me of John in a lot of respects in terms of his guitar playing, but he's also an incredible keyboard player. He's an incredible drummer, incredible singer. He auditioned for Neal's band on every instrument, actually.
Right.
So anyway, we had this great band, and halfway through the Momentum tour, Neal said, this is such a great band. It would be great to actually utilize everybody's creativity and write together and have everybody singing and so that's when we decided to add the word band to the Neal Morse Band, and just that one little word makes a huge difference, because now we write the music together, and there's multiple singers. Bill and Eric are doing a lot of lead vocals. I'm doing a lot of singing. So the dynamic is very, very different from the older Neal Morse albums.
It's more fun this way?
That's, it's definitely more creatively satisfying, but fun, I don't know. I have a different take on what makes a band fun. To me, sometimes being in a band with 4 or 5 or 6 different chefs in the kitchen, it's great. It's a great creative process, but it's also incredibly frustrating.
Of course.
Like, in Dream Theater and all those years in Dream Theater, I very much had a lot of creative control, and John and I, produced the albums together, and then, we wrote the music together, but then from that point, I had a lot of creative control. And there's something to be said for the process is a lot easier that way, After I left Dream Theater, every band I've done, Flying Colors, the Winery Dogs, Adrenaline Mob, Metal Allegiance, the Neal Morse Band now, every one of these bands are kind of, democratic bands where everybody has creative input. And that's great, because you get a little bit of everybody in it, but it's also very frustrating. Like every single aspect, there's like 100 emails, and it just can, and I'm in like 4 or 5 different bands at a time. So every question for every band branches off to a million emails. So that's not fun. To me, that's not so much fun. It's a lot easier when you can make a decision and just move forward.
Especially when you want to be in control and you have that desire to kind of...
Well, to be honest, after all those years at Dream Theater, I was very happy to be, a team player.
Right.
And, for the Winery Dogs and Flying Colors, actually, I'm very comfortable being a team player. I think I have this reputation of being a control freak, but no, I actually like working together. It just sometimes can be very frustrating and sometimes makes things take 10 times longer than they need to. But yeah, in terms of, is it more fun for the Neal Morse Band to write together and make decisions together? It's definitely a special band, and a great chemistry.
So, do you follow newer progressive music,
Of
except
course.
for Hagen? So, what's your take on the branching off gent stuff, like more jazzy influences?
I love it. I mean, when I did those Progressive Nation tours back in 2008, 2009, the whole idea was to try to give some exposure to these bands, like, Between the Buried and Me on the 2008 tour, or Big Elf on the 2009 tour. Those are right there, two completely different types of progressive music. Big Elf is more retro, in the vein of the Beatles and Pink Floyd and King Crimson, whereas Between the Buried and Me is, more of in the gent kind of way. I love a lot of these, 8-string guitar bands like Periphery and Animals as Leaders, and even my son's band Next to None, their new material is very, very much in that vein. It's all detuned and a million time signatures and screamo vocals. To me, it's all part of the evolution of progressive music. The word prog can mean anything from Porcupine Tree to, Periphery, and I like it. I think it's important for the genre to do new things and not just be, bands that sound like Genesis and Yes. I think it's important to have these kind of heavy elements.
Do you get inspired by that and want to try to create some stuff?
Oh, absolutely. To be honest, I can't. It's already well beyond my abilities. Even the stuff that my son Max is doing, he's outplaying me, on the drumming on his upcoming album is insane, doing all these blast beats, and I can't do things like that. I see all these YouTube drummers and players doing these things that are way beyond my capabilities.
So Max is the better drummer in the family, is that what you're saying?
Well, technically, possibly, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
He has to have gotten it from somewhere. So.
Well, drumming is all an evolution. Max wouldn't be doing what he's doing if it wasn't for him growing up listening to me and Chris Adler and Joey Jordison. I wouldn't do what I do if it wasn't, growing up listening to Neil Peart. Neil Peart wouldn't be doing what he did if it wasn't, growing up listening to Keith Moon and Michael Giles. It's all about the evolution of drumming, and you could say drummers today are technically better and faster and more capable, but they wouldn't be doing what they were doing if somehow Ringo Starr didn't do it first 50 years ago. So it's all about an evolution.
And people always look like they're in the future. No, not the future, the current. And then they're looking at the past and looking at Ringo, and he's not a good drummer, and that's just false.
Yeah, it's all
because they're not looking at it from the period that he was in.
Yeah, every band, every drummer has its place in history, and it's all an evolution. I grew up with the Beatles and Pink Floyd and Kiss, and none of those drummers are necessarily technical, but they were a big part of shaping who I am.
So, what's your take now? This is actually the 25th year since Emerson's Words were released. So, that means for you, this has been 25 years. You actually can call music your full-time career, I guess.
Yeah.
So, you couldn't do that with When Dream and Day Unite.
Right.
So, how has music changed with the music business for you?
Well, there's the business and then there's the music itself. Those are two different questions. But it's like we were just saying about the evolution. Like when Images and Words came out 25 years ago, there weren't any other bands combining progressive music and heavy metal. And Dream Theater gets a lot of credit for kind of inventing that style. I don't think we invented it. I think we just kind of combined a lot of different things. Or I get a lot of credit for the style of drumming I do, and surely I was just, a conglomeration of all the drummers I grew up listening to. The music scene was very, very different back then when we made that album in '91, and then it came out in '92. The whole grunge movement was taking over, and it was just a very different scene. But even, if you compare the music business then to the way it is now, it's worlds apart. Back then you had to get a record deal. If you wanted to make a record or get any success or go on tour, you had to get a record deal. And, that's why we spent years waiting to make that album, because, we had to have a record deal before we could move forward. Nowadays, bands are just recording on their laptops in their basements. You could put it out on YouTube or Facebook or, whatever, social media, and you could be heard all the way from Australia to Japan to Omaha, Nebraska, like right out of your basement. You don't need a record deal. And sales are completely different. Like back then, bands were selling millions of records. Now, it's the number, the expression that I've heard is that, back then you had thousands of bands selling millions of records. Now you have millions of bands selling thousands of records. There's pros and cons to the way the whole music business has evolved.
Do you find it more difficult to then get exposure for your stuff? Because there is so much out there?
Not for me personally. I mean, thank God. I'm very lucky to already have a fan base.
Yeah.
So I have my social media, which has a lot of people, that I could reach no matter what I do. And I'm very blessed for that. There's very few drummers that have like 1.5 million people on their Facebook page. So I'm very blessed to have such a big outlet. If I was starting from scratch in 2017, it would be very, very scary. And I even see it with Max, once again, to bring him up. But, he has the benefit of having my audience to be introduced to, but I see a lot of other younger bands, and yes, they have the outlets of the social media and they could, make records and get it out there, but it's also harder because the business is such a difficult business these days to break into.
And I suppose it's really hard to actually make money if you're not a huge name. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why you see bands more and more just touring, because that's the only way to make money. You're not going to make it on album sales and even publishing, and prog bands don't get radio play and things like that. So you have to go on the road.
Doesn't that make it hard to create new music, knowing that the only way you can get it really out there is to tour it?
I mean, honestly, I don't think about that stuff. I don't even care about that stuff,
Okay.
to be honest. To me, at this stage in my career, I just make music because I love music.
Nice.
And, I want to do everything from Metal Allegiance to Flying Colors, and have all these different styles. And I just do it for me and for the fans. I don't think about sales or numbers. But once again, I'm fortunate to be in a position where I already have a fan base.
Nice.
If I had to, like I just said, if I had to start from scratch in 2017, it would be very, very scary.
So, with what you're doing now, what do you see? What you're going to do in the future? Do you know?
I always have a short-term vision, because I have to plan, my life, the next 6 to 9 to 12 months of my life. I have to kind of think ahead, and at any given moment, I have 3 or 4 different projects going at the same time. Last year was kind of the Winery Dogs and Twisted Sister. Now this year, it's the Neal Morse Band, and then I have these Shattered Fortress shows. But I've already started work on a Metal Allegiance album. I've already started work on a Flying Colors album. I've already begun work on a new band and a new project I have. So that's all laying the groundwork for what will be coming to fruition in 2018. So I think about a year in advance, but I don't think long term for the future. Like I just kind of go one project at a time.
So that has changed since you became a freelancer as such, since you left.
Well, with Dream Theater, it was honestly one of the main reasons I was getting a little complacent or bored was that it was just this cycle that just kept going. You know, you could set your watch to, okay, 2 years from now, I'm going to be playing this same venue to the same audience. And, you know, every 2 years you write, record, tour, write, record, tour, write, record, tour. And after a while, it started to get a little frustrating for me and a little predictable for me. I needed to shake it up and have a change. And my God, what I've done in the last 6 years is like, you know, I've done like 20 albums with like 12 different bands, and you know, they're all so stylistically different from each other. So to me, that's more exciting and fulfilling, just to have different opportunities and different flavors and different people, you know, with all of these different things.
So let's bring it to something else. What are you currently binge watching?
Well, I'm currently binging on rewatching Twin Peaks because I'm preparing for you know, the reboot in May. To me, that was always my favorite show of all time. When it came out in the 90s, I was obsessed by it. I even got a tattoo, the matching tattoo that the log lady got on the back of her leg. So anyway, I'm so excited about the reboot. So I've been rewatching the first 2 seasons to prepare for that. The other 2 shows that I'm really looking forward to this year are season 3 of Breaking Bad, of Better Call Saul, and season 3 of Fargo. To me, those are 2 of the other best shows on TV these days. And you got your Negan shirt on. I've been loving the Walking Dead this season. And although actually, I've been a little disappointed by the season. The season premiere was one of the most intense episodes in TV history, as far as I'm concerned. I've watched that episode like 10 times now. The rest of the season's been a little disappointing for me, but I'm really looking forward to the finale this weekend.
Cool. So you got a single to wrap it up. So I would just want to thank you for your time. It was really fun to catch up with you.
Yeah,
so,
my pleasure.
Absolutely.
Cool.